The MERN stack, which stands for MongoDB, Express, React, and Node, is everywhere. React alone powers over 11 million websites, and Node.js is the first preference for 90% of the startups. And MongoDB used by 36,000 plus companies worldwide, including giants like Google and Adobe. And Node.js, with its popular web framework Express, has 22 million weekly downloads on NPM. When we look at the job market, it's insane. The demand for MERN developers is growing 40% annually. Average salary is hitting $120,000 plus in the US. And compared to any other technology in the market, especially if we focus on the startup space, getting hired as a MERN stack developer is far easier as compared to other technologies like Java or Go or Rust or Ruby on Rails. But personally, I think there is something fundamentally wrong about this whole MERN revolution. And in this video, I want to shed light on some of my opinions, why I think some things are wrong the way they are right now, and what are the things that should change, especially in the backend development space. First, let's understand why MERN stack became so popular in the first place. For this, two things come to mind. One is the convenient history. What this means is a couple of things that happened in the history of web technologies that favored the use of MERN stack in a very popular way. Couple of things, like first, the introduction of Node.js in 2009, which enabled JavaScript to be used in server side. This was the first time. Before this, JavaScript was used in browsers for building UIs, for interactive UIs and stuff. But introduction of Node.js enabled JavaScript to be run on the server side. And this was a huge introduction in the JavaScript ecosystem. People were already using JavaScript everywhere when it came to the front-end side. And this, the introduction of Node.js, enabled JavaScript to be used in the server side, which made those existing developers who were building front-end to also cover backend. They could now build backend with the same language they were aware of, with the same language that they've been working with all these years. And this boosted adoption of Node.js rapidly. Second thing, technologies like MongoDB. Technologies like MongoDB, which made working with databases very easy because of its schema-less nature and its developer-friendly practices, because of its JavaScript-friendly nature. And soon, MongoDB completely replaced relational database for all the JavaScript developers working in the Node.js ecosystem. Third thing, frameworks, front-end frameworks like React and Angular that came around in the times of 2014, 2015, 2016, they again boosted adoption of front-end frameworks. They onboarded thousands of developers into the front-end ecosystem because of the ease of use of these frameworks, these libraries like React and Angular. It became very easy to build UIs in JavaScript with intuitive syntaxes and intuitive mental frameworks because of the component model, because of the reusable code nature, and all these things was very appealing to the developer community, and a lot of developers started getting onboarded into the front-end ecosystem. And in turn, since people were already building server-side with Node.js with the same language JavaScript, those front-end developers also became back-end developers, calling themselves full-stack developers, and they started to build UIs, servers and databases using MongoDB and JavaScript. And the last thing in the history side is platforms like Heroku and Netlify and Vercel. These made deployments very easy for all these MERN stack projects that people were building in production, that people were building in their side projects. So deployment was not an overhead anymore. People did not need to know about cloud deployment life cycles like CI/CD or deploying on AWS EC2 instance or Docker or nothing. People could just push their code into the GitHub, and services like Heroku, Netlify, Vercel, they will pull the code from GitHub and they will deploy it directly and give you a custom domain to access your app. And this made deployment from hours of effort to a 5 minutes effort, and very beginner friendly. This again was another big factor for the adoption of MERN stack. And that was about the history of technologies that enabled the adoption of MERN stack. And if you notice here, all these historical changes and introduction of new technologies and deployment services, it was all about simplicity and abstraction. And this was the first thing that is wrong about this whole MERN revolution. It was all about the developers' convenience and the simplicity of workflows over code quality or code maintenance or scalability. It was all about abstraction and not having to worry about the inherent system that is running behind the scenes. The next thing after the historical convenience factors is some of the factors that influenced the adoption of MERN stack. First, learning curve. It was very easy for people who are already working as front-end engineers or front-end developers in the JavaScript ecosystem to get onboarded into the backend side of it. You were already familiar with the syntax. You just had to understand a couple of new technologies, a couple of new practices, and that's it. You are a backend developer from now. You are a full stack developer. So the learning curve made it very appealing for developers to get to the backend side of it while they were working as a front-end engineers, and for people who were freshers, people who were getting into programming, the whole full stack nature, the learning curve of full stack nature was very straightforward. You start with a React app, you jump into the backend side of it, you add a couple of routes, you create a MongoDB pre-tier instance in MongoDB Atlas, you copy the URL, you come to your backend, you add it to the environment variable, you make the database connection, you build a Mongoose schema, and you build the controllers. That's it. You are done. You are a backend developer now. And this whole learning curve was so straightforward. Working in backend became easier than working in front end. Second thing, community and ecosystem. The abundance of YouTube tutorials and Udemy courses and Medium articles and hundreds and thousands and millions of NPM packages made sure that no one ever got stuck anywhere. There are always some kind of resource available in a very comprehensive format to help developers get started, not get stuck, and get moving in different use cases. Third thing is startups and prototypes. Because of the easy to use and easy to deploy and easy to learn nature of the MERN stack, startups, companies starting out in different technology spaces, companies who don't have a lot of funds to spend on employees, to spend on training and infrastructure and all, it became very easy for companies like those companies, startup companies, to hire employees who are aware of the MERN stack, or hire any employee and train them in the MERN stack technologies, which is a very easy process because of the easy to learn nature of the MERN stack. And that's the one thing. It was easy to hire and it was easy to train. The second thing was, since a single language was used in both front-end and back-end, now startups, companies who don't have a lot of funds, could save half the amount of money without hiring different developers for front-end and back-end. Now they could hire a single developer. If the developer already knows about the full stack technology, the full stack aspect of the MERN stack, then that's fine, that's great. And if the employee does not, it's very easy to train the employee, encourage the employee to explore the backend side of it with Node.js and Express, since the language is the same, since the language JavaScript is the same across the boundaries. It was now very easy for startups to make employees learn the backend side of it, the full stack side of it. and now they could save half the money. The third thing is this MERN stack is very popular choice for building MVPs because of the nature of the MongoDB database, the schemaless nature of it, and the readily available free-tier instance of MongoDB, and the simplicity of the Express.js framework and the simplicity of React. And all these technologies together, it is very easy to build MVPs in MERN stack. And that became the first choice for startups because of the easy to build MVPs nature of MERN stack. The fourth thing, the rise of bootcamps. And because of the popularity of the MERN stack, because of the ease of use of MERN stack, because of the ease of teaching of MERN stack, and because MERN stack was the first choice for a lot of companies, for a lot of startups, bootcamps started to use MERN stack extensively in their training programs. Because a lot of startups in the market were already using MERN stack and they were hiring a lot of MERN stack developers, MERN stack became their first choice because of the abundance of jobs in the market for MERN stack developers. And the last thing is Json. This is not so obvious of a factor, but in my opinion, it did play a very important role because JSON being natively supported in JavaScript affected the whole life cycle of data in starting from React to Node to MongoDB. And we'll see shortly how this affected the flow of data in a developer's mindset who is working with MERN stack. But this was a very important factor which made MERN stack so easy to use for developers, because now you did not have to worry about the serialization and deserialization of data across network boundaries, because you worked with JavaScript objects. In React, those JavaScript objects got serialized into JSON and traveled to your backend app in Node.js, and they again converted into JavaScript objects without you explicitly deserializing them, or without you explicitly thinking about how to deserialize different types of data into your native format. It all happened very naturally. The data just flew through different boundaries. The same thing happened with MongoDB because of the schemaless nature, because of the nested documents and all the similarities with JavaScript object. Now even interacting with databases became very natural while you are working with Node.js. So some data that flew through MongoDB to your backend, to your frontend, did not have a lot of different aspects between each other. They all looked the same, they all worked the same, they all felt the same. The mental overhead of dealing with different types of data, dealing with data transfer objects, dealing with serialization and deserialization all just went away, because you were working with a single standard of data, which was JSON, which also stands for JavaScript Object Notation. This is a huge factor that we as JavaScript developers take it for granted, and you only start to notice it. You only start to notice the overhead that comes with serialization and deserialization and data flow through different boundaries only when you're working with a different language where JSON is not native. A language like Go, a language like Rust or Python, which JavaScript developers, which full stack or MERN stack developers did not have to worry about. Now the obvious question is, why are we talking about all this? Because obviously these all advantages of MERN stack enabled creation of a lot of developers, onboarding of a lot of developers, thousands and thousands of developers into the JavaScript ecosystem and into the front-end and backend development world. Then what is wrong with it? Why do I think something is fundamentally wrong with this whole MERN stack revolution? First, the culture of JS everywhere. JS everywhere. In here, the first thing that comes to my mind, because I have struggled with this extensively while I was transitioning into Go or Rust from JavaScript, is the truthy falsy mindset. For JavaScript developers like me, like thousands of other developers, we have this mindset of truthy and falsy because of the nature of JavaScript. We put any expression inside a if condition or inside a ternary operator, and we get our work done. Because of the nature of JavaScript, how it casts expressions and values into this two category called truthy and falsy. But in other ecosystems, in other languages, we don't have that. We don't have this concept of truthy and falsy. Now that's one thing. It makes transitioning into other languages and other ecosystem difficult. The second thing is this thing of truthy and falsy mindset makes you lazy. It makes you lazy about how you think about the integrity of your data. And if you pause and reflect on what are the scenarios that you make use of this concept called truthy and falsy, then you will realize how lazy you get when you think about your data or the existence of your data or the value of your data. You depend on the language quirks or the language semantics to get your work done without having to worry explicitly about the data's value. It's not a huge blunder, but I still think it affects our minds. It affects our reasoning capabilities and we only come across it when we are debugging some issue or when we notice a bug that was existing in our earlier code because of this whole truthy falsy mindset. The second thing is because of our culture of JS everywhere, JavaScript everywhere, because you can these days use JavaScript everywhere in mobile applications, in web applications, of course, in servers. In Chrome extensions, you can create IDE extensions, you can run it everywhere. You can build command line applications everywhere. JS has an ecosystem, a vast ecosystem where you can build anything and everything with just one language, with a couple of new libraries. Now, that is a great thing. That is a great thing when it comes to innovation and building new technologies. But this also creates a laziness in developers when it comes to using the right tool for the right job. We become lazy in terms of choosing our tools. We start with JavaScript and we end with JavaScript. We do not look elsewhere. We do not think that whether for our this particular use case, Node.js is the right choice for our server, or whether MongoDB is the right choice for this kind of data model. We don't worry about that anymore. We have a stack and we stick it everywhere that we can. And as a result, backend development became a victim of developer laziness as compared to architectural soundness. The third thing is, as I said, the flow of JSON creates a lot of delusion in our mind about the flow of data, about the structure of data, and about the interpretation of data across different boundaries of network. And because of that, we became dependent on the JavaScript ecosystem, the React, Node.js, MongoDB ecosystem when we are building apps, because we don't have any other mental framework where we think about data. And someone who is moving from a MERN stack to a language like Go, they will be very intimidated when they see how Go deals with data across network boundaries. Like, you have to explicitly marshal your JSON when you are sending your data across your network boundary, or when you receive a JSON, you have to explicitly unmarshal that JSON into a native Go struct before you can use that data, before you can use it meaningfully in your app, because Go has a static type system. Unless you have explicitly bound a JSON data to your struct, you cannot really use it. You have to explicitly cast your types. And I'm not saying JavaScript is bad in that way or Go is better in that way, but the thing I am focusing here is how the flow of data, the delusion of flow of data affects the way we make our decisions. You as a developer, as a backend developer, not spending most of your time worrying about your structure of your data, about how data flows through your network boundaries and what is the most convenient, what is the most efficient way to enable the data storage, the data transmission, and the data serialization and deserialization, everything surrounding data is not a good thing. That part being abstracted out from you and being taken care of by the language, and you just focusing on the business rules, of course, that provides an advantage of speed, but at the cost of a lot of technical debt when the product gets complicated and when the product gets huge. The second area where I think things are fundamentally wrong are boot camps. Now, I'm not saying boot camps are bad or you should not join boot camps or they are doing very bad service by teaching MERN stack. That's not the thing, but because of all these thousands of YouTube tutorials about building CRUD apps, building CRUD apps with Node.js and Express and React and MongoDB, and all these boot camps teaching capstone projects using a real world app using MERN stack, and all these availability of hundreds of tutorials and resources of people building MERN stack projects using those same 4 or 3 limited technologies are giving rise to a wave of developers that are completely unaware of backend fundamentals. These hundreds of tutorials and bootcamps that teach these MERN stack technologies are creating a legacy of developers that are overconfident and thousands of apps that are underperforming, that are inherently complex and full of technical debt because of the lack of fundamental principles in backend that these bootcamps and these coding tutorials and full stack projects are forgetting to teach, that are of use when you're building real world production style projects. These bootcamps and coding tutorials are teaching developers to think of backend as an extension of frontend, which leads to poor backend APIs that lacks scalability and error handling and observability and all these important concepts. You can try it yourself. You can go ask someone who has recently learned full stack project development using our typical YouTube tutorials or any bootcamp using our typical MERN stack technology, React, Node.js, Express, MongoDB. You can go and ask them that why do we use backend in the first place? Just ask a simple question. Or if you are one of those developers who has recently learned full stack project development, ask yourself, why do we use backend in the first place? Why not use all those features, interaction with databases and all those things that we do in the backend? Why not do them in the front end only? Because in the front end also we can run JavaScript. In the backend also we are running JavaScript. And the front end also has computation capabilities. Then why do we need backend in the first place? Ask them this simple question, and most of the time this is what you will get as an answer, because they will say, because it is a full stack application, we have a front end and we have a back end and they interact with each other. This is the front where users interact, and that is the back where developers build logic. That's the kind of answer you will get. No one knows why do we use backend in the first place, or what is the importance of it. Why did we isolate it from the front end world? What is the need of it? How do we scale it? And all these things. And every fundamental concepts that comes with backend development. Basically, MERN stack is building thousands of developers who are jack of all trades and master of none. They also encourage a front-end centric view of backend development. And mostly APIs are designed based on what the front-end needs at the moment, because the same developer is building both the front-end and the backend. And again, that's not a bad thing, but it is a bad thing the way bootcamps and coding tutorials teach it. You have a requirement in your front end for some feature, you come to backend, you add those changes, and you have an API which provides those changes. This is how we develop, and this is how a typical workflow looks like for a full stack developer. We are not building backend for the sake of backend development anymore. We are not building it as a separate system with its own fundamental principles like validations, observability, and reusability, versioning, and all those hundreds of concepts that exist only in the backend world. And because of the same developer was building both the frontend and backend, there was no need for documentations like OpenAPI and Swagger anymore, because you're the one building the APIs and you're the one consuming it. There is no need for documentation, of course. And when some other developer needed to understand or use that API or make changes to that API, they did not look at the documentation anymore. They just read the code and they moved on with their day. This completely took out the need for documentation, and that's a very bad thing. All in all, this whole bootcamps, coding tutorials, full stack development, everything combined made backend development just a database proxy. Backend only exists to take data out of your database and send it to your frontend and put data from your frontend into the backend and do some additional logic in the controller layer. That's all backend boiled down to be. The third thing is MongoDB. I cannot measure the amount of damage in terms of code quality, in terms of performance, in terms of developer productivity, in terms of developer growth, everything, in every factor, how much damage MongoDB has caused over the years. Now, MongoDB got popular because of these two major reasons. One thing is the schemaless nature and the interplay with JavaScript and JSONs. Because of this nested documents and everything, it felt very native for a JavaScript developer to interact with MongoDB databases, or as compared to relational databases, which has a very flat structure, which has a very relational structure. The second thing is its free tier model for MVPs. Because MongoDB offered this free tier database that is ready to start with one click of a button, anyone could open an account in mongodb.com and they can create a free tier instance. They can copy that URL, paste it in their backend app, and they can start developing with a ready-made database in their local environment. And they can also share that URL with other developers, and they can all use the same database for development. Now, it took out a lot of headache. First thing is you did not have to install a local database application like Postgres or local MongoDB instance and all. The second thing is collaboration became very easy. So that's why the adoption of MongoDB boosted so rapidly. But the problem with MongoDB is, in my experience, 99% of SaaS backend apps that we build are and should be built with a relational database because of the kind of data that we typically deal with. A relational database provides a lot of advantages over MongoDB. Things like referential integrity and foreign keys and all, joins and all these relational database concepts that MongoDB does not offer. While we are developing with MongoDB, we just throw in JavaScript objects inside and we are done for the day. We don't worry about the structure of the data. We don't worry about the efficient storage of the data, efficient fetching of the data, indexing, nothing, because of the schemaless nature that MongoDB has. It does not restrict you in any way. So over the time, when you build with MongoDB over the time for years, you forget the importance of databases, the importance of relational databases in the first place. Why did we come up with relational data in the first place? Things like this pollute a developer's experience when it comes to database technologies, your mindset, how you look at data, everything, your perception around data, your judgment, your experience, everything gets polluted when you solely work with MongoDB combined with JavaScript. Now, it caused a lot of damage in that way for MERN stack developers. Now, what is the solution here? What am I proposing here? I'm not saying MERN stack is bad. I'm not saying MERN stack developers are bad. or they don't have enough experience to build systems or to build backend systems. That's not what I'm saying. My point is MERN stack development makes it difficult for you to grow as a backend engineer. So first thing that you can do is stop calling yourself MERN stack engineer or MERN stack developer. It was cool once upon a time. It's not cool anymore. So stop calling yourself that. Call yourself a software engineer or a backend engineer or a front-end engineer. Stop calling yourself with the name of a framework or a trend, basically. The second thing is get outside of the MERN stack bubble. Explore other technologies, explore other languages, explore Python, explore Golang, explore Rust, explore .NET, whatever you are curious about. There are a lot of other backend technologies there where people are building stuff, where people are shipping stuff. Explore those technologies, compare it with JavaScript, compare it with your existing knowledge, how JavaScript or how MERN stack kept you in a delusion of abstraction. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's bad when you don't see it. It's bad when you don't understand what are the abstractions that you are getting in a language or in a framework or in a library. So get outside of the MERN stack bubble and explore other technologies. Third, understand that backend itself is a craft and it's not just a glue or it's not just a database proxy. It does not exist to cater to front-end. It's a completely separate entity, completely separate system in itself, and it has a lot of components, it has a lot of building principles, and it has a lot of standard practices, best practices, industry standards, and a lot of things to explore and learn from. It does not start and end with a CRUD API. Fourth, understand the mindset of static typing. When you're a JavaScript developer, even a TypeScript developer, you are spoiled. You are spoiled when it comes to dealing with data types. When you get into a language where the language is statically typed, you train your brain to think more seriously about the structure of your data, to think more seriously about the trade-offs that you're making, about the choices that you're making, about the size of your data, about the type of your data, and everything surrounding your data. I'm not saying dynamically typed languages like JavaScript or Python are bad or statically typed languages are good, but statically typed languages make you think more about your data, and thinking about your data is always a good sign. And since we are talking about databases, if you have not explored other database technologies apart from MongoDB, then it's high time you do that. Explore a relational database. It could be MySQL or Postgres or SQLite even. It's very easy to get started with without installing any technologies in your system. And explore a relational, and do not try to invade the world of relational databases with your pre-existing knowledge of MongoDB, pre-existing knowledge of nested documents and populating fields and putting everything in a JSON and calling it a day. Do not come with those philosophies. Understand how relational databases work. Understand why they were made, understand normalization, understand indexing, understand every aspect of relational databases, how you are supposed to build them, what are the best practices, how should you name your tables, how should you name your fields, what constraints you should apply, what are the ideal design patterns, everything surrounding relational database. A mastery of relational databases, it could be Postgres, MySQL, is a very valuable skill in the backend development market. So do not underestimate that. Get outside the MongoDB bubble and explore relational databases. After you do that, then you have the acumen to choose the right database for the right job. Now you don't use MongoDB because that's the only database that you know how to use. Now you use MongoDB when you have a format of your data that is suitable for MongoDB. It's suitable for MongoDB. It's optimized for MongoDB. MongoDB caters to that kind of data. Now you are a more mature backend developer who knows when to choose a NoSQL database and when to choose a relational database, a SQL database, right? And that itself is a very important skill to have as a backend engineer. Get yourself a virtual magnifying glass and focus on every single component in a backend system, starting from entering of data into your system, the serialization and deserialization, the routing, the controllers, the middlewares, the authentication and authorization, the databases, and the logging, structured logging, and the observability, and how validations and transformations and appropriate RESTful architecture, appropriate standard practices, best practices, everything surrounding a backend system. Explore and deep dive on every single topic. Do not assume things, do not take things for granted, and understand everything that affects your data, that affects your system. Forget about the front end, forget about building a interactive and beautiful UI with React and all. Install Postman or Insomnia, or even forget about Postman or Insomnia. Just understand how OpenAPI docs work. If you're working with Node.js or if you're working with Golang, just research how to integrate OpenAPI docs and interactive OpenAPI docs in your backend app, and test your API while you document them and make it a habit. Then change your mind about the flow of JSON that happens between frontend and backend and database. And that is only possible if you get out of your MERN stack bubble. When you explore another language, let's say Python or Golang, there you have to explicitly think about the JSON that is coming from your client, that is coming from your front end, and how it gets converted into a native data format, which is not JavaScript. Now you are in another language territory. Now you have to think about your data. Now you have to worry about the interoperability between different data formats and all, between JSON and your native formats. Now you won't take the flow of JSON that happens in a typical JavaScript full stack app as granted. You have to worry about data formats at every step while you're sending data from front end to your backend, while you're sending data from your backend to your database, when you're fetching data from your database to your backend, and when you're fetching data from your backend to front end. At every step, you have to worry about the state of your data, how you're storing them, how you're fetching them, how you're sending them, everything surrounding your data. Now, these skills make you appreciate the underlying systems, make you appreciate years of effort that went into building scalable systems, distributed systems, and systems that perform efficiently under heavy load, systems that have maintainable code that stays maintainable even with years of development and even with hundreds of developers coming and going from and to the code base. And it will make you appreciate how things like networking, HTTP protocols, serialization formats, and routing algorithms, and database indexing, database concepts, and all these underlying system level concepts work together, and you'll appreciate your system more deeply, you'll understand your system more deeply, and you will be a better MERN stack developer at the end of the day. And you won't be a MERN stack developer just because that's the only technology you know. You will be a MERN stack developer because that was the right tool, that was the right framework for the job at your hand.